Long before Arizona became the 48th state of the Union, Native American tribes like Navajo, Hopi, Pima, and Tohono O'odham lived and thrived in the extreme Arizona climate. The Arizona Territory was known as a rugged land with few roads and lawless frontier towns. In 1875, less than 10,000 people were in the entire Arizona Territory. Today, more than 4 times that many people live here in Apache Junction alone. At first, the newest state grew slowly. Then came the railroad, and Arizona never looked back. Welcome aboard! Along the way, you'll see how a difficult and demanding territory became the vibrant and progressive state it is today. In 1877, the Southern Pacific Railroad arrived in Yuma and linked with Tucson in 1880. Here you see how those towns would have looked with their frontier-style buildings and horse-drawn transportation. In their heyday, there were 76 railroads operating in Arizona, many disappearing often overnight due to changing market conditions. What didn't change was the importance of the railroads in hauling Arizona's important products, known as the 4 C's: copper, cattle, cotton, and citrus. At one time, Arizona railroads stretched over 2,500 miles. The tracks of the Superstition Mountain Museum Railroad here run a length of 1,500 feet, the distance of 5 football fields. Wherever the railroads went, businesses of all kinds thrived, no longer dependent upon horse and mule-driven wagons in good weather conditions. As industry flourished, opportunities drew Easterners to Arizona in large numbers, growing from 120,000 residents in 1900 to some 7 million today. And as Easterners flocked to the state for relief from the cold of the northern states, a 5th C was added to Arizona's list: C for climate. Water was the most precious commodity, and the building of the Lake Roosevelt Dam in 1905 brought needed water management to the Phoenix area and provided for increased industry and settlement. Today, the Roosevelt Dam Reservoir holds more than 500 billion gallons of water. By the middle 1800s, gold and silver were actively mined all over Arizona, with major discoveries in the Yuma area near the merger of the Colorado and Gila rivers. And with those discoveries came the Wild West of legends. Despite the news of train and stagecoach robberies that plagued early settlers, economic opportunity drove Easterners to flock to the railroads to carry them to the American Southwest. Today, copper is the main natural resource that Arizona produces, more than any other state in America. In Superior, Arizona, new copper discoveries were found some 7,000 feet beneath the long-closed magma mine. This reborn mine will guarantee that Arizona will be the dominant supplier of copper well into the next century, and much of that copper ore and finished product will travel on Arizona railroads. Important lumber products that built towns in Arizona and neighboring states were carried by railroads that crisscrossed central and northern Arizona. Although precious metals are now mainly byproducts of the copper mines, gold and silver are still found by individuals who closely guard their mine locations. Arizona still has some 46,000 registered gold mining claims. But the legendary granddaddy of gold, the Lost Dutchman Mine, may still lay hidden deep in the Superstition Mountains. In the late 1800s, the demand for cheap transportation of goods to and from Arizona spurred a frantic railroad building surge. Southern Pacific track crews, working with military precision and organization, laid 10 miles of track in a little less than 12 hours, a feat that has never been equaled. Thanks to the railroad, Arizona ranchers, copper miners, farmers, citrus growers, and lumber harvesters finally had a fast and economical way to ship their goods to market. Cattle ranching was an important Arizona business in the late 1800s, with over 121,000 head counted, growing to nearly 900,000 today. And along with the cattle came the cattle rustlers. Gangs like the Clanton Gang plagued southern Arizona, stealing cattle and holding up stagecoaches. Bandits didn't stop with cattle rustling and stagecoach robbery. Trains were an attractive target. Dozens of gangs like the Albert Stiles Gang in 1899 operated in the Arizona Territory. One of the most daring train robberies was from the Southern Pacific Express train, held up near Cochise, Arizona. Some $10,000 in gold and currency was taken after the gang blew open the strongbox with dynamite. Train robbery once carried the death penalty, although it was never enforced. Train robberies weren't the only danger to those who worked or rode on the early trains across Arizona. Train wrecks were all too common. In 1909, a Southern Pacific passenger train derailed near Benson, Arizona, and plunged 40 feet below the tracks. An engineer and fireman were killed, and 50 were injured. If you chose to take a stagecoach from the east to Arizona, you'd endure 3 weeks of travel over 2,800 miles of bone-jarring terrain, stopping only to change drivers and horses. One passenger said, "I know what hell is like. I've just had 24 days of it." The town of Dutchman's Gulch, coming up, represents a typical Arizona town in the 1920s and 1930s, with Main Street featuring dozens of establishments, including theater, gas station, railroad yard, bank, dance saloon, old cars, and the area's first AM radio station. Hello, Dutchman's Gulch. Look carefully when you visit Dutchman's Gulch in person, and you can see the town church, Smmrr, the town cemetery, the school, and Pam's Dance Palace and Saloon. These were the times when electricity wires were first being strung. Only 20% of Arizona homes had a radio. Only 20% had an automobile, and there were very few paved roads to drive them on. Railroads brought automobiles, radios, and other goods from the east at affordable prices. Railroads carried the electrical poles, the wires, and the men and women needed to install them. On the right, we're passing the railroad yard that kept the steam engines running and the mechanics of the town busy from dawn till sundown. A railroad laborer made $1 a day, while the train engineer made $2 a day. There are plenty of townsfolk here waiting for the passenger train, taking them to the next town for work or for adventures just beyond the horizon. You had to have money to travel the rails in those days. Ticket prices were high. In 1887, from Phoenix to Maricopa, you'd pay about $3 for a ticket, about the same price as a stagecoach ticket, but without the jolting ride that came with it. Sounds like a cheap price for a ticket, but that $3 ticket would be $81 in today's money, and that for a ride of just 35 miles, traveling at the breakneck speed of 20 miles an hour. We hope you've enjoyed this exhibit at the museum. It was some 3 years in construction, with dozens of volunteers pitching in and becoming important railroad people as train engineers, conductors, and builders of these train landscapes and buildings. Thank you for riding the Superstition Mountain Museum Railroad.